Well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. And this is the Biblical Meaning of Success webinar. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend time with the Institute and with Hugh Whelchel. My name is Kristen Hansen. I'm the Vice President of Communications here at the Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics. And I'd like to just take a second to tell you a little bit about who we are. The Institute was founded in 2011, just about almost 2 years ago. It's hard to believe. We've had a really exciting journey, and we thank you for engaging with us and cluing in and listening to our content. We'd love to hear your feedback. We have an exciting message, and really it's all based in Scripture. Our purpose is to help Christians find fulfillment and purpose in their work and have a greater impact in this world. We believe that there's a powerful connection between Christians understanding the significance of their work and the flourishing of all society. And to that end, we've been working on developing sound biblical and economic teaching, research papers, blogs, white papers, videos, to really equip Christians to change the world for Christ through their vocation. So Hugh Whelchel has stepped in to lead this institute. Hugh has an extensive background in the business arena. He was someone that really wrestled with what is the meaning of my work. I work in the business field. I feel like I'm a sort of a second-class citizen to those who are pastors and missionaries. Does what I do matter? And to that end, he went to seminary to try to really dig into Scripture, and he's going to tell you more about that journey. But in the process, really discovered the biblical doctrine of work and this whole idea of the biblical meaning of success. Hugh also led the Reformed Theological Seminary here in D.C. for about 8 years, and turned that seminary around from one that was struggling to one that was really growing here in the D.C. area, and stepped out of that to help start and found this new Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics. And we have just been starting this new webinar series, and this is the second in this series on the biblical meaning of success. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Hugh. And Hugh, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Kristen. It's a pleasure to be here. We once again thank everybody for tuning in for the webinar, and we will try to make it well worth your while. What I wanted to do today is start by talking a little bit about two contrasting views of work. The first is kind of the modern doctrine of work, what I would call the modern doctrine of work. It's really all about us. It's making money so that you can do what you want to do, or working for status. This is the typical example we see so much in our culture, where people either work for status or they work money so that they can buy the status that they want. So this doctrine of work is really all about me. It's about me being recognized for what I do, about me being driving the right car, being in the right house, or having the right lifestyle. And the other more contrasting view, one we want to talk about today, is what I call the biblical doctrine of work. And probably the best way you can describe that is that work is the gracious expression of creative energy in the service of others. And I would also add to that, in the service of God. Work is not primarily a thing one does to live, but a thing one lives to do. So the first question I would really like to consider is, does that describe your work? Do you work to live, or do you live to work? I think that's very telling, the answer to that. It's interesting that in our culture, people have not done work for the sake of their work, but for what it will bring to them. And I think that's a major change that we need in our society today. And if Christians alone would get this proper understanding of the biblical doctrine of work, I think there's no limit to the impact that we could have on our society. What I want to do today is kind of give you an example. What we're trying to do here at the Institute of Faith, Work, and Economics is change the way people look at what we call this intersection of faith, work, and economics. Sometimes we call it stewardship. We're trying to get them to take a shift in the way they look at what the Bible says about work and how it applies to their own personal lives and their own personal vocational call. The best illustration I can give you is one from this Federal Express story. A lot of people don't know the story about Federal Express. Fred Smith, a number of years ago, decided he needed a modern logo, and he went to his design people and said, look, I want you to make me a logo that's very modern looking, that'll stand the test of time, that'll be around for a while. And they came up with this logo, which is probably, some would argue, the best known logo in the world, probably. What a lot of people don't know is that when he did this, there was kind of a tradition with companies that move freight moving companies, that most of them always had an arrow in their logo. And what Fred Smith said is, you know, I don't want to break with tradition. I want an arrow in my logo. But he told his designers, I don't want it to be obvious. And in fact, it's so unobvious that most people can look at this, or most people have looked at this logo a million times and never seen the arrow. So I'd ask you to look at the screen and see if you can pick out the arrow in the FedEx logo. Now, if you're like me, these kind of puzzles, I can look at them for all day and I never see the arrow. So I'll give you a hint. As you can see, the arrow is between the E and the X. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you had never seen the arrow in that logo before, you will never look at that FedEx logo again without seeing the arrow. What's happened is this kind of visual shift in the way that you look at these things. You know, it's exactly what we want people to do with their understanding of the biblical doctrine of work. We want people to see their work in a completely different way as Christians, and when they do that, they will change, their work will change, and we hope their environment will change. Most of this I've put in a little book I wrote called How Then Shall We Work? And what really the book is about is my own personal struggles trying to understand why my work was important to God. And what I discovered over a long period of time, had to go to seminary, it's probably a 10-year process, that there are basically 5 biblical principles that you need to understand to really understand this biblical doctrine of work. And so I lay those 5 principles out in the book. And one of those principles I want to talk about today, and that's what I call the biblical doctrine of success. I'm going to suggest to you today that there's a special way of looking at success that's both biblical and really very different than the world looks at success. And as a Christian, you will never find deep satisfaction, deep purpose in your work until you understand this biblical view of success. And it really, the problem we have in our culture today is that, and I hate to be the one to tell you this, but you've been lied to. You've been told 2 great lies, and these 2 great lies have permeated our culture over the last, probably the last 40 years, maybe even 50 years. They're told to kids in school, they're told to students in high school, students in college, and they are told over and over again throughout the business world. And these 2 great lies have caused tremendous damage to the way we look at success. The first lie is simply this: you can do anything you want, or you can be anything you want to be. It's often told or couched as the American dream. We put it in modern parables like, in America, anyone can grow up to be president. Or if first you don't succeed, try again. And I think what's happened with this first initial lie is that it set us up, most of us up for failure, and we'll see why in a minute. The second great lie is that you can be the best in the world. The second great lie is similar to the first, but possibly even more damaging. This idea that you can be the best in the world. The reality is it's just not true, but yet we tell people that over and over and over again. And once again, it sets Christians up for to really be discouraged about their work. Interesting enough, these 2 great lies are accepted by Christians and non-Christians alike in our culture, and I would argue they've done catastrophic damage to our view of work and vocation. Let me just give you an example to show you how these 2 particular lies are so really dominant in our culture today. This is a little book, a little business book written by a guy who's very popular. This particular book spent 4 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. It sold more than 100,000 copies in print in less than a month. And it's one of these inspirational business books. It's not a genre that I particularly like, but they sell a lot, and they're quite popular. This is a quote out of the beginning of this book. The quote is simply this. It says, Hannah Smith is a very lucky woman. She's a law clerk at the Supreme Court. She's the best in the world. Last year, more than 42,000 people graduated from law school in the United States, and 37 of them were awarded Supreme Court clerkships. Any one of the 42,000 who graduated from law school last year could have had Hannah's job. That's on page 4. Now look at that last statement. Of all these 42,000 people, any one of them had graduated from law school last year could have had Hannah's job. I don't think so. Here's the thing. Hannah Smith was a very, very smart woman. She really tried hard. She did everything that she had to do. Interesting enough, I was telling this story one time, and a friend of mine said, I knew her. She was one of my classmates. He said, not only was she the absolute most brilliant person in our class, she had all sorts of ties and family connections that helped pull a lot of strings to help her get that clerkship. So this idea that anyone could be, any of these graduates from law school could have had that job is just not reasonable. And yet, it's what we're told all the time, that if you try hard enough, if you really study hard, you can be the best in the world. There are only a few people who can be the best of the world. Interestingly enough, what it's done, it's set many, many people up, particularly the 2030 generation, for failure. And they even have a word for the frustration they feel once they move into the marketplace and begin jobs and realize they're not going to be in the corner office the second year out of college. They call it the quarter life crisis. And truly, we have set people up for failure through this unbiblical definition of success. And we as Christians should know the truth, but yet we've been sucked into this idea of this cultural idea of success. Instead, these great lies have helped us define success in the 21st century. This is really the problem. Success has become one of the great idols of our culture and is defined in being the best, the master of our own destiny. Interesting enough, Tim Keller in his book Counterfeit Gods describes it this way. More than other idols, personal success and achievement lead to a sense that we ourselves are God, that our security and value rest on our own wisdom, strength, and performance. To be the best at what you do, to be at the top of the heap, means no one is like you. You are supreme. Now, I want to introduce you to one of my idols who was actually the best in the world. He's passed away just recently, but his name was John Wooden. He was a basketball coach. Coached basketball for UCLA during the 60s and the 70s. And during that period, he won 9 national championships in 11 years, a feat that surely probably never will be repeated. So I think there are few people that would deny in his field he was the best in the world. Now, here's the interesting thing. He was once asked, and by the way, John Wooden was a very committed Christian. A lot of people don't know that about him. But he was asked once what his definition of success was. And this is the definition of success that he gave. He said, success is the peace of mind, which is the direct result of the self-satisfaction in knowing that you did the best to become the best that you're capable of becoming. It's easy for me to say, but what he's saying there is that success looks like you taking the gifts and the skills that you have and maximizing those given the opportunities that you've been presented. This is the biblical definition of success, guys, and I would suggest that John Wooden got that definition straight out of Scripture. In fact, I'm going to show you this morning where I think he got it. There's an interesting story that we all know very well called the parable of the talents. Now, we remember what happens in this story. The master decides he's going to go on a trip, and he brings in 3 of his servants. And his servants, he tells them he's going to be gone for a while. He's going to give them each one a certain amount of money, and he wants those servants to use that money appropriately and give him a return on their investment. So the first servant comes in, he gives them 1 talent. Second servant comes in, gives him 2 talents. And then the last servant comes in, he gives him 5 talents. Now, here's the interesting thing about the story. He goes off. The servants really don't know when he's coming back, but when he does come back, and we really don't know how long he's gone, when he does come back, basically what happens is he calls each one of them in and asks them to give an account of what they've done with the money he gave them. This story is found in Matthew 25. And I would like you to look at this particular verse. It says, "For it will be like a man going on a journey," which we said, "called his servants and entrusted them with his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another he gave 2 talents, to another he gave 1, which is what we said. Now here's the interesting part. This next phrase, which is often overlooked when we look at this parable. The last thing he says, after he gave another one, each according to his ability. Then he went away. See, the master understood that we are not all equal, that some of us have certain gifts, some of us have gifts in other areas, and basically he realized that the one servant was a 5-talent guy, the other servant was a 2-talent guy, and then the last servant was a 5-talent guy. And he realized that the 5-talent guy had more capability to produce more with what he was given than the 1-talent guy. In our culture today, that almost sounds unfair, but all of us know that is the reality. And the problem we have in our culture today is we set ourselves up thinking that we all have to be 5-talent guys, or we all measure ourselves against 5-talent guys. And if you're a 2-talent person, if that's the way God made you, you need to be satisfied with that's who you are. And you are never going to be able to measure yourself against a 5-talent guy. If you do, you're just setting yourself up for failure. Yet that's exactly what we've done over and over and over again in our culture. So once you see this picture, you begin to realize that even God sees that there are differences in our abilities. Now, here's another interesting thing about this story that often goes overlooked. I was doing a study one time, and I began to think about it. I thought, I wonder what a talent is worth in today's dollars. You see, I always felt like the guy that only got 1 talent really got kind of shortchanged. And in my mind, and this probably came from me hearing this story in my youth, but I always just think, here this one guy got 1 crummy little coin, and what could you do with just 1 crummy little coin? So I sat down one day and did the math to figure out what a talent is worth in 2013 dollars. And here's the interesting thing. We can't be sure the exact amount, but it was a huge sum of money, somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. So think about that in that story. Like I said, when the master comes back and he calls the servants in, the 5-talent guy had produced 5 more talents, the 2-talent guy had produced 2 more talents, but the 1-talent guy said, look, I know you're a hard man, and I was kind of afraid that, you might get on to me if I lost money, so I just basically buried my $500,000 in the backyard. No wonder the master was upset with him. And I think this tells us one of the first things about this story, that no matter if we're a 1-talent person or if we're a 5-talent person, God always gives us enough to do what he requires from us. And so this idea of, well, it's not fair, this guy only got $500,000 or $1 million, that doesn't seem fair, but another guy got $5 million. It's not a matter of fairness, it's a matter of God knows each one of us. He created each one of us. He gave us each gifts and level of gifts. He knows what we can do, and he's never going to ask us to do something beyond what we have the capability of doing. So we know the end of the story. The one servant that was given 1 talent only actually created no wealth out of that talent, and really received fairly harsh rebukes from the master. One of my favorite movies of all time is the movie Gladiator, and there's a great scene at the beginning of that movie when General Maximus is riding up and down and getting the troops ready to attack the German horde. I'm not sure really why I like that scene, since my ancestors were part of the German horde and they were get ready to go beat up on those guys. But nevertheless, he makes a great statement as he rides up and down on his horse, getting his troops ready. He says to them, "What we do in life echoes in eternity." Now, that wasn't true for General Maximus, but it is true for us. And one of the things that the parable of the talents points to in our own personal lives is that what we do in the here and now does matter in eternity. And if we are faithful with the gifts that God has given us, if we take those gifts and maximize those and understand that that's what success looks like. The success is me taking the gifts and the talents that God has given me, using them in the opportunities that he presents before me and getting a maximum return on those gifts. That's what the master's looking for. It's interesting. The master said to both the servant with 2 talents and the servant with 5 talents who produced in excess. He says to both of them, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little, and I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of the master." But the one who had 1 talent and did not do anything with it, he called him a wicked and lazy servant. And the reality is simply this. What do you want to hear when this is all done? What do you want to hear from the master? So this is my best shot at a biblical view of success. Success is faithfully using all that God has given us for the furtherance of his kingdom here on earth. This work should bring us both joy and peace of mind, knowing that we have done our best through the power of Christ working through us to accomplish what he has called us to do, to make a difference in the world in which we live. The parable of the talent teaches us a biblical definition of success in this age, which is very applicable to our vocational calling. And the real takeaway should be this. We shouldn't compare what we're called to do with what other people are called to do. We're only required to do the best that we can do with what God has given us to work with. Another one of my favorite movies is a movie called The Chariots of Fire. It was a 1981 Academy Awards winner. If you haven't seen this movie, you should go rent it or download it and watch it. It's an incredibly great movie, very inspiring. And it's about a Christian, a Scottish Christian, who was a 100-meter dash guy who was preparing to run in the 1924 Olympics. And there's a great scene in there where he's talking with his sister. She is concerned that he's kind of given up what he had originally told people that he believed God wanted him to do. That was to go to China and become a missionary. And what he tells his sister is, look, I haven't forgotten that. I'm still going to go do that. But right now, God has made me fast. And when I run, he says, I feel his pleasure. Now, interesting enough, everybody quotes that, and it's a great thing. And when you work, you should feel God's pleasure once in a while. We're not going to feel it all the time because we live in a fallen world, and we know that work is difficult, and that difficulty is part of the curse. But you should get a glimpse of what work is going to be like in the new heaven and new earth. That work will be full of pleasure, will be full of satisfaction. So even though work is difficult now, we should occasionally feel a glimpse or see a glimpse, kind of feel the joy that God has prepared for us when we do our work. So when he says, I feel his pleasure, once in a while we should feel his pleasure when we're doing what he's called us to do. Now, here's the thing that never gets quoted that I think is very interesting. It's the last piece of that scene. Not only does he say, when I run, I feel his pleasure, then he goes on to say, to win is to honor him. And this is an interesting thing I find in church, that we really don't talk a lot about competition. And yet us who are in the business world go out and we have to compete every day. And it's almost like the church almost gives us this idea that competition is bad, somehow sinful and just dirty. I'm here to tell you, I don't think anything could be farther from the truth. The guy who took 5 talents, think about this, was given $5 million and went out and made another $5 million while that master was absent. That guy had to go win some deals to make that kind of money. He had to go compete in the marketplace. There's nothing wrong with competition. There's nothing wrong with competing in the marketplace. In fact, what does Paul say? Paul says, I run the race to come in second. No, that's not what he says. He says, I run the race to win. And we should go out and compete to win. And to do that, to honor God, not ourselves. This is one of the problems I think we have, once again, in our culture today. We tell people that we need to win for all the wrong reasons. So winning becomes the ultimate thing, not just a tool to serve God, to glorify him, but it becomes the ultimate thing to glorify ourselves. That's why we end up with people taking steroids. That's why we end up with people cheating in the corporate workplace, because we've raised this idea of winning to an ultimate idol, and people believe that they have to have it. I think one of the great things about sports is it gives us an arena to find how we can go compete and really put ourselves to the test and do the best we can do, but then understand that we're not going to win every time, that sometimes we're going to lose, and that we learn how to win graciously and we learn how to lose graciously. Unfortunately, some of the events I've been to recently, I fear that some coaches are forgetting that lesson, but it's a lesson we need to teach our children so that when they go out and work in the workplace, they'll know how to compete. They'll know how to do it graciously. They'll know how to do it honestly and with a true Christian ethic, understanding that we run the race to win, to honor Christ, not to honor ourselves. We work at the pleasure of the Lord God Almighty, and our work should be driven by our love of the Master. Our only desire should be to hear him say at the end of the day, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of the Master." Thank you. I think we're going to take some questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Hugh. And now's the time to type in your question. I know a number of you have submitted questions to us in advance, and we have those here. But if, as you've been listening to Hugh, you've got a question for him, please pull up that toolbar on the side of your screen and send us a question. We'd be happy to respond in the next few minutes. Thanks so much for staying with us. Hugh, some questions here. We'll start with this one. Do you suggest believers in business avoid using the word success that has sometimes secular implications and perhaps use the word significance? What do you think of the difference between those two words?
Yeah, I think that's one way of looking at it. I think one of the problems is that you can be successful without gaining any type of significance. I think one of the things that we're supposed to find from our work, particularly if we see it from a biblical perspective, and this is what I talk about in the book, that our work should give us great joy, it should give us significance, and it should give us great purpose. And I think all those things are true if you're doing the best that you can do. Once again, if you look at the success from a biblical perspective, what we've been talking about, if you're going out and doing the best that you can do, once again, let me go back to John Wooden. One of his favorite stories he used to tell was that he would win games, his team would win games, and he'd be furious at them. And you think, well, they won, that's all they needed to do. But he was furious because they did not play up to their potential. And he said there were other times when they lost that he was really happy with the way that they performed because he knew they did as good as they could do, and they just that day ran into a better team. And that's what's going to happen to us. So I think what we have to do is recalibrate our understanding of success, realizing that if we look at success from a biblical perspective, we'll win some and we'll lose some, but we'll always find significance in what we do because we're doing it for the right reasons. Once again, it's all about motivation. So I understand the question, and significance is very important. I think it's something that people desperately looking for. I think one of the problems is that many 20, 30-somethings aren't finding significance in the workplace because they don't understand this biblical doctrine of work. So what they're doing is they're going looking for other places. I mentioned the whole idea of the quarter life crisis. I think that's a real huge problem today with a lot of people. And they are basically come to the conclusion that I can't find any significance in what I do at work, so I'm going to go outside my work and look for significance somewhere else. So I think that, the real reality is to find significance, we have to use the biblical meaning of success.
Great, thanks, Hugh. This is a question from someone who's struggling with this idea of competition, and you spoke to this a little bit in the webinar. Maybe you could elaborate, but they're asking, what is the biblical basis for competing against other candidates to receive a highly sought-after job?
Yeah, no, listen, I feel your pain. I've struggled with that my entire life, and it really wasn't until I began to understand some of these principles I lay out in the book. I just didn't see how it all fit together. And like I said, I've been in church all my life and have never heard anything good about competition. In fact, I heard just the opposite. I played a lot of sports, and it's funny, there's a great story about a friend of mine and I were captains on two different teams at a church retreat one time. And both of us were playing to win, and we really got into it, and kind of in the heat of battle, to the point that a couple of people on the sideline thought we were going to come to blows, and we got the pastor and brought him down to kind of reconcile our relationship. And when the pastor came back, he saw the two of us just joking around and walking kind of arm in arm, so to speak, as comrades. And they said, well, what happened? We thought you guys were mad at each other. And we said, mad? We were just competing. I mean, we played to win. And so I think, there is a sense that we got to have a better understanding, a more biblical view of how we compete. I don't think, once again, as I said earlier, if we compete fairly, if we compete ethically, I don't think there's anything wrong about it. We also have to understand that winning is not everything. That competition should be about being the best that we can be with what God's given us to work with. And once again, once we get that firmly rooted and understand that we compete to win, not to make us look better, but to fulfill our call from God on our life to use our talents appropriately, I think then everything begins to shift. It really brings us to a different place, and we really start thinking about competition very differently. But yes, I think, if you're in the workplace, if that's the job that God's called you to do, if you feel like that's what he wants you to do, you should compete and work as absolutely hard as you can to get that job, knowing that if you don't get it, God must have something else in store for you. So I think there's a sense that, we go do what we are called to do the best we can, and then let God kind of work out how it all ends up.
Great. This is another question about this topic of sort of comparing yourself to others. You talked about the 5-talent guy, the 2-talent guy, and a 1-talent guy or gal. This person's asking, can one child of God be more successful than another child of God?
And that's a great question, because it really goes back to how do we define success? If that means, if he's asking or she's asking the question that says, can any child of God be the best in the world? The answer is no. I was on a radio show a while back, and this question came up, and a woman called in. She was very upset about me using I said that it's not true that anybody in the United States can grow up to be president. Well, I mean, theoretically that's true, but in reality it's not true. And I mentioned that, in the grocery store where I go, the guy that owns the grocery store has hired some young men to come in and bag groceries, and these men obviously are impaired. But how great is it that he's given them this opportunity to really retain their dignity and really go do something that's useful, and that they found dignity in their work, and they're there working every day. It's great, and these guys are really nice, and they talk with you, and they just love. You can see they love what they're doing. They love serving people. But neither one of those guys are ever going to grow up to be president. So I mean, this idea that we're all the same, that we're all equal, it's just not true. Diversity is woven throughout all of creation. All you've got to do is look around and see it. And there's a lot of conversation out there about income inequality and that everybody should make the same amount of money. I just don't think that's true. I don't think that's the way the world's set up, and it certainly wasn't true in the parable of the talents.
Time for just a couple more questions. I've got a couple that have come in kind of on the same topic, but a little bit off topic from what we're talking about here, but obviously something people wrestle with a lot. And that is, how do you reconcile the sovereignty of God with the fact that I'm in an industry and field that I really don't like? I'm unhappy in my work. Should I just work for God and grin and bear it?
Yeah, good question. That's a great question. And I think this is one of the problems. We live in kind of the already not yet. The kingdom of God is here in our midst, but it's not fully consummated. That won't happen until Christ comes back. And when he comes back, we'll live forever, a new heaven and new earth. Work will be perfect. In fact, I tell people all the time, think about the best 2 minutes of work that you can possibly imagine that or you've experienced in your lifetime of work. Every minute in the new heaven and new earth, as we labor for Christ, will be better than that. But in this present world, because we labor under the curse, things are difficult. And I mean, the scripture says, we will by the sweat of the brow, we will earn our living. And so work is hard. It is difficult. I often come home if I've had a hard day and I tell my wife I've struggled under the curse today, and that's really true. Now, that being said, if you never find any joy in your work, if you never are happy about what you do, you may want to look and see and begin to pray about you may be in the wrong occupation. It may be that God has something else in store for your life. Now, that being said, there's also periods of time when God will take you into a very difficult job to teach you something. And then once you've learned that, he takes you on to the next thing. So, I don't know where this person is in their career or where they are in their life, but that's, a little bit that they can think about.
Great. One last one, and this is, gosh, with the rich meaning of work now, you could be tempted to maybe work all the time and 14, 15, 16-hour days, if you really know the meaning of it. So this person asks, how does one know when your work is done? I mean, when do you stop?
Yeah, no, that's a real good question because, any of us today, I think, the great thing about technology is you can work from home. The bad thing about technology is you can work from home. So, you can literally work 24/7 on vacation no matter where you are. And I think, once again, it has to go back to understanding kind of this some people call it life balance. Os Guinness, in his book, The Call, says something I think very profound. He says that our primary call as Christians is to become disciples of Christ. And I think that's very true. And then he says out of that primary call then flows 4 secondary calls: a call to the church, a call to community, a call to the family, and a call to vocation. And I think as we think about it, a large chunk of our lives, just because it's the way it is going to be lived out in vocation. But that can't consume all of our lives because we have these other callings. We're called to the church. We're called to be faithful and use the gifts that we have in each one of us in our churches for the edification of the body of Christ. So that's something that needs to be in the mix. Our call to family. Now, our call to family differs. At one point in your life, you're a son or a daughter. Another point in your life, you may be a husband or a wife or a father or a mother. And each one of those roles, as they differ, may require more time. I've just entered in a role in my life in the family as a grandfather. And it's a great gig. And if you haven't got to that place yet, it's something to really look forward to. But each one of these requires a different amount of time and a different amount of involvement. The same thing with our call to community. From time to time, we're going to be called to be good neighbors and to know our neighbors and to do things in our community. That requires time. So there's this delicate balancing act that has to take place. And invariably, if you get way off to one extreme, I've seen a lot of people that literally are building their companies on the backs of their families. They're working 80, 90 hours a week and ignoring their families. And I'm not sure that's a good trade-off. Once again, there may be a time when you're starting something new that you have to spend more time at work to get it started, but there needs to be a time when you back off and balance that back out with the other things you're doing. So I think one of our things to remember is this quote from Os Guinness that our primary call are to be disciples of Christ, and then that flows out into other areas of our lives. And constantly look at our lives to make sure we're in balance there.
Thank you. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up there as our time is running out, and I want to make sure that you all can get on with your days. I wanted to just give you all, thank you so much, Hugh, for your presentation. I wanted to just point you all to our website and just give you a brief tour of our website. And if some of these ideas were exciting to you, I know that they've been transformational for me as I've been working here, and it's fun to be a part of getting them out. This is the Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics, our website. We have a lot here. Really, the space to sort of continue to engage with us would be on our blog. And this is where people like Hugh, people like our resident theologian Art Lindsley, and our economist Ann Bradley and Jay Richards are writing daily on the topics of stewardship, on the topic of the 4-chapter gospel, the creation, fall, redemption, restoration, and what does that mean for our view of work and economics. I encourage you to check out our blog, and you can sign up there on the right-hand side to receive that right in your email box. And that would be the best way to continue to stay in touch with us. Also, if you're interested in looking at past webinars, if you click on research and go to videos, you'll find the webinar that Hugh did last month there. Does my work matter to God? And that's posted on YouTube, so you can share that with others. Thanks so much, Hugh, and thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to being with you on a future webinar.